Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video from our channel, KHA News. In this video, we'll take a gentle look at the American stars we've recently lost, along with other beloved figures from around the world who have touched our hearts. Before we begin, we truly appreciate it if you could show your support by giving this video a like. It helps us continue sharing these heartfelt stories. Thank you for being here. Now, let's begin.
1.
Bernard LaFayette Jr., a key strategist of the civil rights movement and a champion of nonviolence, passed away on March 5, 2026, at the age of 85, following a heart attack. Lafayette played a quiet but crucial role in shaping history, helping lay the groundwork for the Selma voting rights campaign that led to the landmark Voting Rights Act of 1965. His dedication to justice began in childhood and guided a lifetime of activism rooted in courage, discipline, and faith. Born in Tampa, Florida in 1940, Lafayette's path was shaped early by witnessing racial injustice. He later joined the NAACP as a young boy and went on to study in Nashville, where he trained in nonviolent resistance alongside future leaders like John Lewis and Diane Nash. Together, they helped lead sit-ins that desegregated Nashville, marking a major victory in the movement. In 1961, Lafayette took part in the Freedom Rides, enduring violent attacks and imprisonment, yet remaining steadfast in his commitment to peaceful protest. As a founding member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, he later moved to Selma, Alabama, where he worked tirelessly to organize voter registration efforts and empower local communities despite constant threats to his life. He also worked closely with Martin Luther King Jr. and became national coordinator of the Poor People's Campaign, continuing King's mission of economic justice and equality. After King's assassination, Lafayette dedicated himself to spreading nonviolence as a global philosophy, teaching and mentoring future generations. Throughout his life, Lafayette served as an educator, author, and leader, earning advanced degrees from Harvard University and guiding institutions focused on peace and justice. His memoir, In Peace and Freedom: My Journey in Selma, captured the spirit of his lifelong mission. Dr. Bernard LaFayette Jr. is remembered as a humble yet powerful force for change, a man who turns personal pain into purpose and helped transform a nation through the enduring power of nonviolence.
2.
Jennifer Runyon, a beloved actress known for her work in 1980s film and television, passed away on March 6, 2026, at the age of 65, after battling cancer. Runyon brought warmth and charm to the screen, becoming a familiar face across a wide range of popular productions. Born in Chicago in 1960, she grew up in a creative household that inspired her early passion for performing. She began her acting career in 1980 and quickly gained recognition through her role on the soap opera Another World. She went on to appear in numerous television series, including Charles in Charge, where she played Gwendolyn. That same year, she made a memorable appearance in the iconic film Ghostbusters, sharing a scene with Bill Murray in one of the film's most recognizable opening moments. Throughout the 1980s, Runyon continued building a steady career with roles in films like Up the Creek and appearances on hit shows such as Beverly Hills 90210 and Murder, She Wrote. She also took on the role of Cindy Brady in A Very Brady Christmas, connecting her to one of television's most cherished families. In later years, Runyon stepped away from Hollywood to focus on her family and personal life, eventually working as a teacher and even hosting a cooking podcast. Her close friend, actress Erin Murphy, remembered her as a kind and special person whose presence touched many. Jennifer Runyon is remembered for her gentle spirit, memorable performances, and the joy she brought to audiences during a defining era of television and film.
3.
Troy Murray, a respected NHL center, Stanley Cup champion, and longtime broadcaster, passed away on March 7, 2026, at the age of 63, after a battle with colorectal cancer. Born in Calgary, Alberta in 1962, Murray developed his passion for hockey on outdoor rinks before rising to prominence with the University of North Dakota, where he helped secure the 1982 NCAA National Championship. That same year, he captained Team Canada to its first gold medal at the IIHF World Junior Championship, showcasing the leadership that would define his career. Drafted by the Chicago Blackhawks, Murray went on to enjoy a distinguished 15-year NHL career, spending the majority of his time in Chicago. His standout 1985-86 season saw him record 45 goals and 99 points, earning the prestigious Frank J. Selke Trophy as the league's top defensive forward. Over 915 games, he tallied 230 goals and 354 assists. Murray later served as captain of the Winnipeg Jets and also played for the Ottawa Senators, Pittsburgh Penguins, and Colorado Avalanche. In 1996, he reached the pinnacle of the sport by winning the Stanley Cup with Colorado. Following his playing career, Murray became a beloved radio analyst for the Chicago Blackhawks, known for his insight, humor, and deep connection with fans. Off the ice, he was admired for his warmth, leadership, and devotion to family and community. Troy Murray is remembered not only for his achievements in hockey, but for the character and kindness he brought to every part of his life, leaving behind a lasting legacy in the sport and beyond.
4.
Corey Parker, an actor known for his work in Will and Grace, Friday the 13th Part 5 A New Beginning, and 30-something, passed away on March 5, 2026 in Memphis, Tennessee, after a battle with cancer. He was 60. Born July 8, 1965 in New York City to actress Rochelle Natalie Parker, Corey began acting as a child in commercials and trained at the High School of the Performing Arts. His early career included roles on television, with his first appearance in As the World Turns in 1983, and the breakout film role as an ill-fated greaser in Friday the 13th Part 5 A New Beginning. He went on to appear in films such as 9½ Weeks, Biloxi Blues, Big Man on Campus, and starred alongside Laura Florence Boyle in How I Got Into College. On television, Parker earned recurring roles in 30-something, Flying Blind, Love Boat: The Next Wave, and later appeared on Will and Grace as Josh, one of Grace's boyfriends. His performances were noted for their warmth, sincerity, and comedic timing, leaving a lasting impression on audiences and colleagues alike. Beyond acting, Parker became a deeply respected acting coach, teaching at Duke University and Rhodes College, and mentoring actors on sets of shows including Sun Records and Miss Marvel. His students described him as a guide who nurtured confidence and self-worth, helping many achieve critical acclaim in theater, television, and film. Diane Franklin, who worked with Parker in How I Got Into College, said, "Sometimes you work with an actor who makes the world a better place. Corey was naturally funny, sincere, and just a good guy." Corey Parker is survived by his family and the countless actors whose lives he touched as both performer and teacher. His legacy is remembered not only for the characters he brought to life on screen, but for the mentorship, encouragement, and inspiration he provided to a new generation of artists.
5.
Stephen Hibbert, actor, writer, and Groundlings alum, passed away from a heart attack in March 2, 2026, in Denver at the age of 68. Hibbert's career spans multiple facets of entertainment. He began as a writer, contributing to Late Night with David Letterman, and later to animated and family shows including Animaniacs, Darkwing Duck, and Boy Meets World. As a member of the Los Angeles improv troupe The Groundlings, he honed his comedic skills and built lasting connections in the industry. Hibbert is best known for his unforgettable role as the masked Gimp in Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction, 1994, a character that achieved cult status despite having no dialogue. He also co-wrote It's Pat, the movie, with his then-wife Julia Sweeney, and appeared in films including Austin Powers' The Spy Who Shagged Me, Rush Hour, and The Cat in the Hat, as well as television shows such as Just Shoot Me. In his later years, Hibbert focused on teaching writing and sketch comedy in Denver, and worked with the nonprofit school On Wheels, tutoring homeless children and supporting educational opportunities for those in need. He is survived by his children Ronnie, Rosalind, and Greg. Hibbert is remembered for his humor, creativity, and dedication to mentoring the next generation of performers and writers. Michael Douglas, born on September 25, 1944 in New Brunswick, New Jersey, now in his 8th decade of life, stands as the heir to a legend, the father of a fighter, and one of the most layered personalities ever to emerge from Hollywood's long and glittering procession of stars. Some men inherit greatness only to be crushed beneath his expectations. Others rise from obscurity to achieve it, yet spend their lives feeling like imposters in their own triumph. And then, on rare occasions, there exists a man who embodies both journeys at once. A man who carries the weight of a famous surname for years like an iron chain, only to discover that what he believed restrained him was in truth the very ground beneath his feet. Michael Douglas is such a man. He entered the world already illuminated by a light not his own. His father, Kirk Douglas, was not simply a celebrity. He was an institution, a cinematic colossus forged from discipline, charisma, and relentless will, one of the defining visages of American film during its golden mid-century era. To be born as Kirk Douglas's son was to step into a narrative already unfolding, a story dominated by a hero so commanding it seemed to leave no space for another leading figure. Yet Michael created that space. He shaped it deliberately, arduously, and with remarkable precision. First as the producer of a film now considered among Hollywood's most revered achievements, then as an actor who earned the Academy Award portraying one of cinema's most unforgettable antagonists, and later as a man who confronted grave illness, personal turmoil, and the steady march of time with a refusal to yield. His biography resembles a script critics might dismiss as implausible for containing too much drama to be real. A storied dynasty, a marriage undone, a career that almost never began, an Oscar won through darkness, a romance that startled the public, a son nearly lost to addiction and reclaimed, and the cancer battle he faced with disarming honesty. Through soaring triumphs few performers ever touch, and the set that might have shattered others completely, Michael Douglas has remained what he has always ultimately been, something exceedingly uncommon in the world of fame. He has remained authentic, not the polished authenticity curated by publicists, nor the carefully rehearsed sincerity of promotional interviews, but the kind forged only through hardship, true mistakes, true devotion, and true endurance. With age, his presence has gained a quiet gravitational pull. When he speaks or performs, one senses a man whose words are earned, whose insight was purchased with lived experience. He was born into privilege, yes, the child of a screen legend raised along the edges of glamour, but privilege alone never explains a life like his. Yet if Michael Douglas's life teaches anything, it is that privilege is not a fortress. It cannot bar grief from entering, cannot bargain with sickness, cannot promise that love will last, that children will be spared pain, or that a career built over decades will remain unshaken by time. Advantage is simply a point of departure, not a guarantee of arrival. Where you begin is circumstance. What you make of it is character. And what Michael fashioned from his beginning stands by any meaningful measure as extraordinary. In the journey ahead, we trace the full sweep of a life both gilded and hard-won. From a boy raised amid the fault lines of Hollywood royalty to a young man straining to step out from beneath a father's colossal shadow. From a daring producer who risked everything on a story set in a psychiatric ward and reshaped modern cinema, to an actor who came to personify the perilous magnetism of ambition and desire. From husband and father to patient and survivor, we will follow him through eclipse and renewal, loss and resurgence, until we meet a man in his 80s who is still working, still imagining, still unmistakably alive, and who has earned more than most the right to look back on his years with quiet pride. This is Michael Douglas's story, and it is one that the man's telling. Michael Kirk Douglas, to a father whose name was already beginning to echo through the corridors of American film history, and the mother who would spend much of her life searching for stability within the seismic reality of loving that man. To understand Michael, one must first understand the forces that shaped his origin, both the world he entered and the world that existed before him. His father, later known to millions as Kirk Douglas, was born Isser Danilovich Dembski in Amsterdam, New York, the son of impoverished Russian Jewish immigrants who arrived in America with little but endurance. He forced his way upward through grit alone, juggling countless jobs, financing his own schooling, and pursuing acting with a fierce, almost desperate intensity. By the time Michael was born, that relentless drive was on the verge of igniting into legend. Within a handful of years, his father would headline films that defined the cinematic era: Champion, Ace in the Hole, Lust for Life, Spartacus, performances that radiated volcanic force. He was commanding, kinetic, impossible to ignore, a presence that dominated every room and left little space for anyone else to breathe. Michael's mother, Diane, was a Bermudian actress of striking grace and intellect. She had met Kirk while they were both students at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York, and their romance flared with the intensity of two young performers convinced that shared ambition could anchor a lasting union. They married in 1943. Michael arrived as their first child, followed by his brother Joel 4 years later. Yet even as the family expanded, fractures had already begun to spread. By the time Michael was old enough to sense what a family should feel like, the marriage was straining. Kirk Douglas was fashioned less for domestic stillness than for conquest, of stages, screens, audiences, and, painfully, of women. His affairs were frequent and scarcely hidden. The emotional climate of Michael's early home was therefore charged with tension, distance, and the quiet, persistent loneliness, the kind that comes from having a parent who was physically present, yet inwardly far away. Fame was rising swiftly around his father, bright and consuming, and within that glare, the boy who would become Michael Douglas began his life in the long shadow of a legend just beginning to blaze. The kind of celebrity produced by mid-century Hollywood was not gentle or discreet. It arrived like a spotlight switched on at full intensity, blinding, theatrical, and impossible to ignore. That magnitude of fame did not merely illuminate lives, it scorched them. Marriages especially often proved fragile beneath its heat, eroding quietly until what once seemed permanent dissolved into memory. Michael Douglas was 7 years old when his parents' marriage ended in 1951. 7, an age poised between comprehension and confusion, old enough to recognize that something essential had cracked, yet young enough to spend years privately wondering, like so many children do, whether he had somehow been responsible for the fracture. After the separation, Michael and his brother Joel moved with their mother to Westport, Connecticut. Diane met upheaval not with resentment, but with resilience. Rather than allowing disappointment to harden into bitterness, she reconstructed her life piece by careful piece, eventually remarrying and giving her son something close to emotional steadiness. It was not the dazzling world their father inhabited, but it was reliable, warm, and real. Still, even the most devoted stability cannot entirely replace a parent who is gradually transforming into a legend. Kirk Douglas was becoming less a daily presence and more of an image, his face gazing from posters, his voice echoing through theaters, his name inked into headlines instead of spoken across a dinner table. He did not intend absence. By all accounts, he loved his sons, but his capacity for love was entwined with the same fierce inward drive that had lifted him from poverty to prominence. He phoned, he visited, he made gestures of connection, yet each visit carried the unmistakable aura of who he was becoming. For a perceptive child already grappling with questions of belonging, time spent with a father who was simultaneously iconic and unfamiliar could feel disorienting, even unreal. It was an emotional puzzle that would take decades to assemble into understanding. Michael's childhood unfolded between parallel worlds. In Connecticut, he was simply another boy, attending classes, forming friendships, navigating the tentative uncertainties of adolescence. But in the orbit of his father's renown, he became something entirely else, the son of Kirk Douglas. The title sounded grand, yet offered little instruction on how to live inside it. He studied at respected schools, including the Allen Stevenson School in New York, and later Eagle Brook and Choate Rosemary Hall in Connecticut, institutions that opened doors to privilege while quietly reinforcing expectation. He performed well enough academically, though not spectacularly. His interests wandered widely, his attention sometimes drifting, as he later admitted. Beneath it all lay a persistent search for identity, the desire to define himself without being dwarfed by the silhouette cast ahead of him. The bond between Michael and his father formed one of the deepest psychological narratives of his life. It shaped his ambitions, informed his creative instincts, influenced his relationships, and sharpened his insecurities. Over time, it would evolve into something tender and reconciled, a resolution more affecting than most scripted endings. But during those formative years, it was simply difficult. Kirk Douglas embodied everything Michael both admired and dreaded: stature, authority, charisma, the intoxicating proof that a man could build himself through sheer force of will. To want those qualities was natural, yet to pursue them risked living forever in comparison to a figure who seemed almost mythic. It was a paradox without an obvious solution, and Michael spent much of his early adulthood negotiating its edges with caution. He enrolled at the University of California, Santa Barbara, graduating in 1968 with a degree in drama, a decision that declared his intentions while inviting inevitable speculation. Was acting his authentic calling, or was it the only language his father had ever spoken fluently, the dialect through which a son might finally be heard? The truth, as is so often the case in human lives, was not singular. It was layered. There is no shame in such complexity. The strongest motivations rarely come from a single source. They arise from intertwined desires, contradictions, and half-understood longings. Michael Douglas pursued performance because the craft itself stirred something genuine within him. The transformation, the storytelling, the electric hush before a scene begins. But he also pursued it because somewhere deep inside remained the boy who had watched his father ascend into legend and silently resolved that he too would be seen. "I am here," that inner voice insisted. "I matter. I am not merely an appendix to someone else's story." Proving that would not be swift, nor would it be painless. His earliest years in the profession unfolded without glamour, as most beginnings do. There were modest roles, incremental lessons, auditions that led nowhere, and the gradual accumulation of skill earned through persistence rather than applause. It was a quiet apprenticeship in humility, the realization that performing before a camera demanded far more discipline than simply dreaming about it. Each small opportunity became another step in an education that no classroom could replicate. And though the progress was slow, it was real. Beneath the weight of expectation and the shadow of inheritance, Michael Douglas was beginning, almost imperceptibly, to step into his own light. In 1972, Michael Douglas entered millions of homes each week as Inspector Steve Keller in the streets of San Francisco, sharing the screen with the formidable Carl Malden. The series lasted 5 seasons and provided him with something every young performer longs for, but few achieve so early: consistent national recognition. Viewers trusted him. He projected confidence without strain, warmth without calculation, and the quiet authority that felt instinctive rather than rehearsed. The camera seemed to understand him, and he understood it in return. Still, television in that era, even successful television, was regarded by the film establishment as a smaller arena, a proving ground rather than a pinnacle. Michael sensed that his trajectory pointed elsewhere. He believed he could do more, reach further, risk bigger. The problem was not ambition, but access. How does a young actor step beyond the boundaries of expectation? The answer arrived from an unexpected direction, not through a role, but through a gamble. It would be a decision of such boldness that it altered his life's course, shifted the contours of American film, and announced with unmistakable clarity that he was not merely the heir to a legacy, but the architect of one. At 30, standing where aspiration meets opportunity, he found himself holding a property few studios wanted. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, adapted from Ken Kesey's novel about rebellion inside a psychiatric institution. His father had owned the rights for years, having starred in the stage version, and had tried repeatedly to bring it to the screen without success. Passing the project to Michael was both an act of paternal confidence and perhaps a quiet recognition that the story's future belonged to someone younger, someone willing to risk everything on it. Michael approached the task with unexpected gravity. He partnered with Saul Zaentz, secured backing from United Artists, recruited Czech director Milos Forman, whose outsider's perspective would sharpen the film's critique of authority, and cast Jack Nicholson as a defiant Randall McMurray. Nothing about the undertaking was safe. Kesey himself voiced disapproval. The subject matter was stark, unsettling, resistant to sentimentality. Industry insiders doubted audiences would embrace it. But risk, when matched with conviction, can become revelation. When the film premiered in November 1975, it did more than succeed. It resonated. Critics hailed it. Audiences embraced it. And at the Academy Awards, it accomplished a feat so rare it borders on myth, capturing all 5 major prizes: picture, director, actor, actress, and screenplay. At the center of that triumph stood Michael Douglas, only 31, credited as producer of one of the most celebrated films of this generation. He had achieved an age when many are still searching for footing, a milestone that permanently distinguished his name from any shadow. Yet he did not intend to remain behind the scenes. The success of Cuckoo's Nest gave him authority, credibility, and the freedom to choose. He used all 3 to pursue what had always stirred him most deeply: performance. Not supporting roles, not peripheral figures, he wanted the responsibility and exposure that come with carrying a film. The transformation from respected producer to leading man would not happen overnight. Through the late 70s and early 80s, he worked methodically, honing instinct, selecting projects with care, learning how restraint, timing, and emotional precision separate competence from mastery. Then, in 1984, momentum crystallized. Romancing the Stone burst onto screens with humor, adventure, and romantic spark. As Jack Collington, a roguish adventurer drawn into danger alongside Kathleen Turner's novelist heroine, Michael revealed a new dimension: charm that felt effortless, wit that landed lightly, confidence that invited rather than intimidated. Their chemistry ignited the screen. The film became a major commercial triumph, and for the first time, there was no ambiguity. Michael Douglas was not simply successful, he was a star. A sequel followed, but more importantly, so did reinvention. In 1987, Oliver Stone's Wall Street introduced Gordon Gekko, a character who would become etched into cinematic memory. Gekko was not a cartoon villain, but a disturbingly persuasive one: sleek, articulate, morally elastic, radiating a belief in his own philosophy. His declaration that greed was good became one of film's most quoted lines. Michael's performance did not rely on overt menace. Instead, he revealed the intelligence beneath the ruthlessness, the conviction beneath the ambition, allowing audiences to see how such a man could seduce a world. His portrayal earned him the Academy Award for Best Actor. More importantly, it confirmed what his journey had been building towards for years. He had not simply inherited a famous name, he had transformed it into a legacy unmistakably his own. He was 43 when the transformation felt complete. Not Kirk Douglas's son, not merely the daring producer behind One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, but Michael Douglas, actor, force, presence, fully realized and unmistakably his own. The years that followed did not suggest retreat or caution, they suggested acceleration. In 1987, Fatal Attraction erupted into theaters and into the cultural bloodstream. The film was more than a box office success, it was a societal flashpoint, igniting conversations about fidelity, desire, and the hidden volatility beneath polished suburban lives. Douglas's portrayal of a man whose momentary recklessness spirals into terror was uncannily grounded. He did not soften the character's flaws, he allowed audiences to witness the cost of impulse without offering comfort. The performance earned him a Golden Globe nomination and reinforced the sense that he possessed an unusual willingness to explore the moral gray. Then came Basic Instinct in 1992, another lightning rod. The film was controversial, provocative, dissected endlessly in the press. Yet at its center, Douglas delivered a performance that was neither defensive nor timid. He leaned into ambiguity, into vulnerability masked by authority.
Film after film, he gravitated towards men who were brilliant yet flawed, powerful yet fragile, figures balanced precariously between ambition and ruin, attraction and consequence. Few leading men of his era demonstrated such appetite for psychological risk. Within a decade, he had become one of the industry's most reliable draws, commanding respect not only for his star power, but for the intelligence of his choices. Simultaneously, his influence expanded beyond cinema. He cultivated a parallel identity as producer, shaping projects with discernment. He became increasingly visible in philanthropic efforts, particularly in advocacy around nuclear non-proliferation and global security. The once shadowed boy had not only escaped comparison, he had created a silhouette that others now measured themselves against. And yet, success at that altitude often obscures fault lines beneath the surface. Publicly, everything gleamed. The tailoring was impeccable, the interviews articulate, the premieres triumphant. But privately, the architecture of his first marriage was beginning to buckle. He had married Deandra Luke.
Appearances, however, are rarely the whole narrative. The pressures of fame intensified as the 1980s closed. With extraordinary success comes extraordinary temptation, the illusion that boundaries no longer apply. Douglas would later speak candidly about that era, acknowledging excesses and self-destructive patterns that accompanied relentless professional momentum. In 1992, he entered treatment for sexual addiction, a public disclosure that invited scrutiny and skepticism, but required a form of courage seldom recognized. For a man whose screen persona often projected mastery and dominance, to confess vulnerability was a radical act. The admission marked a turning point in his marriage, though not one that led to reconciliation. By 1995, after nearly 2 decades together, he and Deandra divorced. The financial settlement, reportedly among the largest of its time, was significant, but the emotional costs lingered more heavily. What unsettled him most was not the headlines or the monetary figure. It was the dawning recognition that patterns from his own childhood had resurfaced. Absence does not always mean physical distance. A parent can be present in body, yet consumed by profession, distraction, or ego. Cameron grew up enveloped in privilege and instability in equal measure. He had access to every material advantage, yet he often navigated a world where his father's presence was intermittent, divided by demands of celebrity and the undertow of personal struggle. The long-term repercussions of that imbalance would only become visible years later, but the groundwork had been laid. Douglas understood with the clarity that hindsight imposes that achievement cannot substitute for attention. Professionally, however, his momentum continued. He maintained the producer's instinct for powerful storytelling, contributing behind the scenes to projects that would later earn acclaim. His acting career persisted at a high register, marked by versatility and depth. But beneath the accolades and premieres, there remained a quiet reckoning. An awareness that mastery in one arena does not exempt the man from confronting the unfinished chapters in another. The paradox of Michael Douglas's life in this period was stark. He stood at the summit of his craft, Oscar winner, international icon, respected advocate, while simultaneously grappling with private reckonings that success could neither silence nor solve. The duality did not diminish him, it complicated him. And in that complication lay the deeper truth of his story, that triumph and vulnerability often travel together, and that even those who appear invincible must eventually confront the fractures within. In 1995, the American president revealed a dimension of Michael Douglas that audiences had only glimpsed before, a gentler, more openly romantic presence that felt disarmingly sincere. He played a widowed commander-in-chief navigating love and responsibility with equal vulnerability, and viewers responded not to spectacle but to warmth. It was a reminder that beneath the intensity and sharp edges of his earlier roles, there was an emotional fluency he could access when he chose. 2 years later, The Game, directed by David Fincher, returned him to darker terrain. The film unfolded as a psychological labyrinth, and Douglas stepped into it willingly, portraying a man whose wealth and control are stripped away piece by piece. He gravitated, as he so often did, towards stories that dismantled certainty. In 1998 came A Perfect Murder, another exploration of ambition tangled with deceit. And in 2000, Traffic offered perhaps one of the most quietly personal performances of his career. As a drug czar whose own daughter descends into addiction, he embodied a father confronting the limits of power in the face of private collapse. Given what was unfolding in his real life with his son Cameron, the role carried an emotional gravity invisible to audiences, but inescapable to him. Standing on that set, delivering those lines, he was not merely acting, he was touching something painfully real. Externally, he was thriving, acclaimed, sought after, prolific. Internally, the truth was more complicated. He was moving forward at speed, but he was also in some measure fleeing from regret, from unresolved guilt about a marriage that had ended in fracture, from the recognition that professional triumph does not automatically translate into paternal presence. Work became propulsion. Each new script, each premiere, each affirmation of relevance provided temporary insulation from quieter doubts that fame cannot silence. And then, unexpectedly, he stopped running, not because of catastrophe, but because of connection. He met Catherine Zeta-Jones, and what began as a glamorous pairing evolved into something steadier, deeper. Their relationship, initially scrutinized for its age difference and celebrity sheen, grew into one of the stabilizing forces of his life. Where chaos had once dominated, there was now structure. Where restlessness had prevailed, there was companionship. That story, however, unfolded gradually and would reveal its true strength only under pressure. By the time he reached 65, Michael Douglas had already lived several distinct lifetimes. He had survived Hollywood's most volatile decades, rebuilt his personal foundations, and settled into what might reasonably have been called a period of earned equilibrium. Then, in August 2010, equilibrium shattered. He announced publicly that he had been diagnosed with stage 4 throat cancer. The phrase alone carries weight, stage 4. It suggests advancements, severity, uncertainty. It demands that future plans be replaced with immediate priorities. The news traveled swiftly across headlines, through fan communities, among colleagues who had watched him evolve over 40 years. The diagnosis had followed months of persistent throat discomfort, symptoms he later admitted he had delayed investigating. When the verdict came, his doctors were direct. The treatment would be aggressive. 8 weeks of radiation and chemotherapy, exhausting, punishing, physically transformative in the harshest sense. The regimen stripped away not only strength, but illusion. Weight fell from his frame. His voice, one of his most recognizable tools, grew strained. He appeared thinner, altered, visibly battling something far beyond performance. Yet, he did not retreat into invisibility. He spoke candidly, gave interviews, allowed the public to see not a carefully managed image, but a man confronting mortality without theatrics. The treatment worked, but in the brutal manner such treatments do, without elegance, without mercy. What struck observers was not grandiosity, but steadiness. He did not dramatize his courage, he practiced it. There was a matter-of-fact resilience in the way he described the process, as if he were drawing from every earlier hardship, childhood fractures, career pressures, personal reckoning, and channeling them into endurance. Catherine Zeta-Jones remained at his side throughout, unwavering. He spoke of her not with rehearsed sentiments, but with unmistakable gratitude. Their marriage, already tested by the pressures of 2 high-profile careers and relentless public scrutiny, deepened under the strain. Adversity can fracture, it can also fortify. In this case, it did the latter. She became, in his words, an anchor, a steady point amid turbulence. By the time mid-2011, he announced that the cancer was in remission. The tumor had responded. The immediate threat had receded. Relief was evident, not just in statements, but in expression, in the renewed clarity with which he spoke about time, about work, about family. Survival reshaped perspective. The future was no longer abstract, it was specific, precious, finite. The experience did not erase vulnerability, it reframed it. Having faced the possibility of disappearance, he returned to his life altered, not diminished, but sharpened. Fame, awards, box office numbers, these were no longer ultimate measures. Endurance was, presence was. The battle had paused his momentum long enough for reflection to take root. And when he stepped forward again, it was not with the restless urgency of a man running from himself, but with the measured gratitude of someone who understood that continuation is never guaranteed, only granted.
In 2013, during an interview that reverberated far beyond the entertainment pages, Michael Douglas made a statement that ignited significant medical discussion. He suggested that his throat cancer was linked not to his past alcohol and tobacco use, as many had assumed, but with the human papillomavirus, transmitted through sexual contact. The comment was dissected by physicians and public health experts alike. Some emphasized that HPV-related throat cancers were indeed increasing, while others cautioned against oversimplification. The debate extended beyond celebrity curiosity. It touched on broader conversations about viral transmission, prevention, stigma, and awareness. Regardless of the precise clinical details, what remained unmistakable was Douglas's willingness to speak openly. He did not retreat behind privacy or euphemism. Instead, he used his own diagnosis as an entry point for public dialogue. That transparency aligned with the tone he had adopted throughout his illness: direct, unvarnished, occasionally uncomfortable, but sincere. He understood that visibility carries responsibility. If his experience could illuminate a larger issue, he seemed prepared to let it do so. The ordeal altered him in ways that did not require announcement. The sharp urgency that had characterized earlier decades softened. Where once there had been relentless momentum, there was now discernment. He became more selective in his choices, more reflective in interviews.
Gratitude surfaced frequently in his language, not as a cliché, but as a recalibrated perspective. He spoke like someone who had been returned from the edge and did not intend to squander the reprieve. Other health complications lingered, as they often do after aggressive treatment. Remission does not erase physical cost, it simply redefines the battlefield. Yet nothing in the years that followed matched the seismic intensity of 2010 and 2011. He emerged tempered rather than diminished, slower perhaps in pace, deeper in resonance. He had confronted mortality and discovered not void, but clarity. And so he returned to work. He always would. For Douglas, acting had never been mere occupation. It was translation, a way to shape internal complexity into something coherent and shared. But the performances after cancer bore a different texture. They were less fueled by ambition and more informed by experience. There was gravity where there had once been speed, nuance where there had once been flash, suffering, when survived, sediment in the soul. His art carried that sediment, enriching it. Yet beyond recovery lay another challenge, one that medicine could not treat because it resided not in his own body, but in the life of his son. Michael Douglas had navigated fame, endured illness, rebuilt his personal foundation after divorce. Now he confronted a different form of helplessness. The anguish of watching your child descend into darkness is distinct from any professional or physical trial. It strips away illusions of control. Cameron Douglas, born December 13, 1978, grew up in a lineage both luminous and burdensome. Being the son of a celebrated actor and the grandson of an icon meant visibility before self-definition. Such inheritance can resemble opportunity from a distance. Up close, it often feels like pressure. Expectation accumulates. Comparison becomes ambient. His childhood unfolded amid privilege, yet also amid instability. The dissolution of his parents' marriage and the constant hum of public scrutiny created an environment as complex as it was glamorous. Cameron was sensitive in a culture that prized resilience, introspective in a landscape that rewarded performance. As adolescence gave way to adulthood, experimentation with substances, common enough among young people, took a more dangerous trajectory. What began casually hardened into dependence, and dependence, insidious and patient, reorganized his life around itself. Michael witnessed this progression with a uniquely painful awareness. He recognized, perhaps more clearly than anyone, the ways in which his own absences had contributed to the terrain his son now navigated. During critical years, he had been consumed by work, by ambition, by the ceaseless churn of celebrity. He had been a provider, a presence in flashes, but not always the steady anchor a child requires. The ensuing guilt that followed was not theatrical. It was internal, persistent, unspectacular in its heaviness. Efforts and intervention became a recurring cycle: rehabilitation, hope, relapse, renewed effort.
Families touched by addiction learned to measure optimism carefully, to celebrate progress quietly, to brace for setback without surrendering belief. There were stretches when Cameron achieved sobriety, when relief softened household tension and allowed cautious dreaming. Then came the returns to old patterns, each relapse carving deeper grooves of despair. For a man accustomed to influence, accustomed to shaping outcomes through will and negotiation, the helplessness was profound. No award could intervene, no reputation could compel recovery. Love alone proved insufficient, though it remained unwavering. The experience forced Douglas into a humbler understanding of power. Fame could move markets and headlines. It could not command another person's healing. And yet, he did not abandon hope. He continued to advocate, to support, to stand beside his son, even when public judgment intensified. The father who once struggled with presence now faced the opposite challenge, remaining steadfast when circumstances offered little reassurance. It was a different kind of endurance than cancer, less visible, more prolonged. In these years, Michael Douglas's life revealed its most layered paradox. Triumph and vulnerability coexisted. Strength and regret intertwined. The man who had conquered Hollywood's heights now grappled with a sorrow that awards could neither amplify nor soften. And through it all, he learned again what illness had already taught him: that control is partial, that love is often tested, and that survival sometimes means simply staying, even when the outcome is uncertain. In 2009, 1 year before Michael Douglas would publicly confront his own mortality, his son Cameron faced a reckoning of another kind. Arrested on federal drug charges, convicted of dealing methamphetamine, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. He was 30 years old. Additional infractions while incarcerated extended that sentence, and Cameron ultimately spent 7 years behind bars. 7 years measured not only in calendar pages, but in missed birthdays, in visiting room conversations under fluorescent lights, in letters written and rewritten when words felt insufficient. Michael did what he could. He visited when regulations allowed. He wrote. He called. He maintained contact through every narrow channel available to a father whose child was behind concrete and steel. Publicly, he carried himself with composure. Privately, those closest to him understood the depth of the grief he bore. The timing felt merciless. As he endured chemotherapy and radiation, fighting for his own life, his son was engaged in a different struggle, one against addiction, against institutional confinement, against himself. The two crises overlapped in a way that tested emotional endurance beyond anything he had previously known. He navigated fear of death while also navigating the ache of helplessness. Cancer could be confronted with treatment plans and medical teams. Addiction, especially from a distance, resisted control. He could not negotiate his son's recovery. He could not purchase it, demand it, or simply will it into existence. That powerlessness was perhaps the hardest lesson of all. Yet, he did not abandon hope. He continued to advocate, to support, to stand beside his son, even when public judgment intensified. The father who once struggled with presence now faced the opposite challenge, remaining steadfast when circumstances offered little reassurance. It was a different kind of endurance than cancer, less visible, more prolonged. In these years, Michael Douglas's life revealed its most layered paradox. Triumph and vulnerability coexisted. Strength and regret intertwined. The man who had conquered Hollywood's heights now grappled with a sorrow that awards could neither amplify nor soften. And through it all, he learned again what illness had already taught him: that control is partial, that love is often tested, and that survival sometimes means simply staying, even when the outcome is uncertain. In 2009, 1 year before Michael Douglas would publicly confront his own mortality, his son Cameron faced a reckoning of another kind. Arrested on federal drug charges, convicted of dealing methamphetamine, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. He was 30 years old. Additional infractions while incarcerated extended that sentence, and Cameron ultimately spent 7 years behind bars. 7 years measured not only in calendar pages, but in missed birthdays, in visiting room conversations under fluorescent lights, in letters written and rewritten when words felt insufficient. Michael did what he could. He visited when regulations allowed. He wrote. He called. He maintained contact through every narrow channel available to a father whose child was behind concrete and steel. Publicly, he carried himself with composure. Privately, those closest to him understood the depth of the grief he bore. The timing felt merciless. As he endured chemotherapy and radiation, fighting for his own life, his son was engaged in a different struggle, one against addiction, against institutional confinement, against himself. The two crises overlapped in a way that tested emotional endurance beyond anything he had previously known. He navigated fear of death while also navigating the ache of helplessness. Cancer could be confronted with treatment plans and medical teams. Addiction, especially from a distance, resisted control. He could not negotiate his son's recovery. He could not purchase it, demand it, or simply will it into existence. That powerlessness was perhaps the hardest lesson of all. Yet, he did not abandon hope. He continued to advocate, to support, to stand beside his son, even when public judgment intensified. The father who once struggled with presence now faced the opposite challenge, remaining steadfast when circumstances offered little reassurance. It was a different kind of endurance than cancer, less visible, more prolonged. In these years, Michael Douglas's life revealed its most layered paradox. Triumph and vulnerability coexisted, strength and regret intertwined. The man who had conquered Hollywood's heights now grappled with a sorrow that awards could neither amplify nor soften. And through it all, he learned again what illness had already taught him, that control is partial, that love is often tested, and that survival sometimes means simply staying, even when the outcome is uncertain. In 2009, 1 year before Michael Douglas would publicly confront his own mortality, his son Cameron faced a reckoning of another kind. Arrested on federal drug charges, convicted of dealing methamphetamine.
To encounter Michael Douglas today is to encounter a man who has lived expansively and paid the costs that accompany such breadth. Fame defined him for decades, but no longer confines him. He carries grief, gratitude, regret, and love with equal openness. And in that openness lies the most compelling chapter of all, a life not merely survived, but integrated. They were married in November 2000, beneath the chandeliers of the Plaza Hotel in New York City. She was 31, he was 56. The numbers invited commentary, speculation, the familiar skepticism that greets any union that defies expectation. Headlines did the arithmetic. Observers predicted imbalance. Michael and Catherine seemed serenely indifferent. They had chosen each other. The rest was noise. Time, not commentary, is the true test of substance. Their marriage has not been sheltered from hardship. In 2013, Catherine Zeta-Jones spoke publicly about receiving treatment for bipolar disorder, a disclosure that required unusual courage in a culture that still stigmatizes mental health. The admission was not framed as spectacle, but as honesty. It opened conversations about pressure, vulnerability, and the unseen cost of living under relentless scrutiny. Michael stood beside her without hesitation, offering the same unwavering support she had given him during his battle with cancer. Their devotion has not been performative. It has been practiced in hospital rooms, in quiet kitchens, in seasons when headlines were unkind and privacy scarce. What they built was not a fairy tale. It was a partnership forged under real weather. Together, they raised 2 children, Dylan and Karis, who have grown into thoughtful young adults, shaped not only by privilege but by perspective. They witnessed illness, public debate, reconciliation, and resilience within their own home. If there is wisdom in that household, it is wisdom earned. Professionally, the years that followed did not resemble retreat. Instead, they revealed renewal. In 2013, Steven Soderbergh's Behind the Candelabra cast Michael as Liberace opposite Matt Damon. The transformation was startling, physically daring, emotionally intricate, stripped of vanity. He did not approach the role with irony or distance. He approached it with empathy. The performance earned him a Golden Globe and reaffirmed the truth often overlooked. Artistry does not diminish with age, it refines it. Then came the Kaminsky Method in 2018, a series that allowed him to explore aging with humor and gravity. As an acting coach navigating late-life absurdities and losses, he delivered something rare, a portrayal that was simultaneously wry and tender. The role introduced him to new audiences who may not have known the full arc of his earlier career. He was no longer merely revisiting past glories, he was extending them. In February 2020, Kirk Douglas died at 103. The passing of his father marked more than the end of a life. It closed a chapter that had shaped Michael's internal landscape since childhood. The tribute he offered was intimate and generous. It did not glorify legend at the expense of complexity. It honored the man he had come to understand fully, honestly, without illusion. Kirk had lived long enough to see his son claim his own place in cinematic history. That symmetry carried quiet grace. So what remains when the headlines fade and the premieres conclude? Michael Douglas at 80 is not defined solely by awards, box office totals, or public accolades. He is defined by integration, by the willingness to examine failure without denial, by the resolve to stand beside a partner in vulnerability, by the humility to acknowledge mistakes in fatherhood and attempt to correct them, by the courage to continue working not out of fear of irrelevance but out of love for craft. He no longer performs intensity, he embodies steadiness. The hunger that once propelled him has matured into discernment. He does not chase validation, he chooses engagement. There is a visible calm in him now, not the calm of surrender, but of comprehension. He has confronted illness, endured public scrutiny, navigated fractured relationships, and rebuilt where rebuilding was possible. He has won and lost and continued. The point, he seems to understand, was never conquest, it was transformation. It was the capacity to evolve through contradiction and adversity. It was discovering who remained beside you when ambition quieted and the lights dimmed. It was claiming authorship over a life that could easily have been dictated by inheritance or circumstance. Michael Douglas's story is not tidy. It contains missteps and triumphs, regret and gratitude, fracture and repair. But it is unmistakably his. Every scar, every accolade, every hard-won moment of grace belongs to the same continuum, and in that continuity lies its meaning. At 80, still working, still curious, still present, he stands not as an icon frozen in nostalgia, but as a man who has allowed experience to shape him rather than harden him. The legend is real, the humanity is more compelling. And in the end, that humanity, the flawed, resilient, deeply lived humanity, is the legacy that will endure longest of all.